Greetings, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to another series of this a fabulous show that we have been doing with our dear brother, Dr. Jay Smith. We've gone through a number of episodes doing a critical analysis. The first one was historical criticism related to Quranic manuscripts and the history of Islam. We've done a historical criticism of Mecca, historical criticism of the direction of prayer or Qibla. And right now we're going to do another historical criticism that has to do with slavery, as it's called slavery in Islam, basically, compared to the traditional view that Muslims have when they make the claim that it's Christianity that is responsible for slavery. Facts is what we are going to share versus emotional arguments and claims. And obviously, as I said, it's no better than Dr. Jay Smith, who have done a number of these seminars recently about slavery in Islam, and we are so delighted to have him here with us in studio. Welcome, Dr. Smith.
Oh, well, thank you. It's good to be back again for our third segment of the historical critique. Started with the historical problems with the Quran. I think we did about 7 or 8 episodes there. We moved into the historical problems with Muhammad and the whole creation of Islam, and looking at the Qibla and Mecca. We did about 6, 7 episodes there. Now we're moving and finishing up with a third segment of history, and that is the whole problem of Islamic slave trade. Now, we've been told, we being in the West, and I don't know what it was like in Saudi Arabia when you were growing up, but certainly when I grew up here in United, I didn't grow up in the States, I grew up in India, but all over in every school in the Western world and also in the Arab world and also in the Asian world, African world, everywhere there's only ever been one slavery. That is the Atlantic slave trade. Which is, I've been told, living with Muslims for 35 years, is created by Christianity, and it's a white slavery of black Africans. And that's pretty much all that we've ever been told. We know about that Atlantic slave trade, and there has been no, at least I'm not aware of trying to shut that narrative down. We need to keep it open. We need to talk about it, and we have been talking about it. And there are lots of institutions that continue to bring up the Atlantic slave trade and how terrible it was. And many countries have apologized for it, and churches have apologized, and Christians have apologized. And so we walk away thinking that this is the only slave trade there ever was. And many Afro-Americans, when I did my survey, when I was doing my master's degree in the 1980s, and I asked them what was the number one reason why Afro-Americans became Muslims, about a third, the biggest reason, well, actually number two on the list was the whole problem of slavery. The fact that Islam is a religion for black people, Christianity is a religion for white people. Islam is a religion of freedom, Christianity is a religion of slavery. Right. And that was a big reason why many Afro-Americans had become Muslims here in the United States. Up and down the East Coast, I was getting the same story. Now, I didn't know any different. I said, well, that's awful that you feel this way. And, I hope you're hearing that the church has asked forgiveness for this. We had a war over it in 1850. In the 1860s, that war, that civil war in America, was to shut down that slavery. And it was successful. And I thank God it was successful. So that narrative is rampant and the only one that ever exists. Now, we have a woman on our team named Sarah Foster, and Sarah Foster is on our team in Britain. She is a descendant of slaves. Her lineage is from Jamaica, which is almost entirely made up of descendants of slaves. And her mother is a historian. She teaches the Atlantic slave trades and all the terrible things and how barbaric it was. So she has grown up her whole life hearing this. And she then came across some material that was put together by a man named Dr. John Azuma out of Ghana. Dr. John Azuma had done his doctoral thesis on the slave trade, but he come from Ghana. His ancestry were the slavers who actually sold slaves to the Arabs. And so he always knew that there was a problem with this narrative. He's coming to the West. He heard, wait a minute, in Ghana, at least we're told that we were the ones that actually sold the slaves to the Arabs. Why isn't that part of the story? So he decided to do his doctoral thesis on this. Dr. John Azuma used to be a Muslim, converted to Christianity, was concerned because it affects his own ancestry. His parents were great-grandparents were part of this whole slave trade, and he wanted to try to flesh it out. And he did what a historian should do, and this is what we've been saying over and again. If you're a historian, you need to go back to the original sources.
That's right.
Or get back to the earliest sources. We talked about this in the last set of episodes concerning the problem with Al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. All these are so much later. We need to go back to that which happened in the 7th century rather than the 9th and 10th century. And the same thing he did about slavery. And surely he was very well aware of the Atlantic slave trade. That existed from 1400 AD up until 1800 AD. So he knew about that. What he had not heard about, though, was the African slave trade on the east coast of Africa. Now, before we even get into all of that, let's just look at some definitions. If you put up on the screen there, you will see defining slavery. There is the complete freedom to work and live wherever is on one side. On the other side is chattel slavery, and in the middle are sweatshop workers. I want to make clear that those who are watching these videos or know, we're not talking about that which is on the left, nor are we talking about sweatshop workers. That's not the slavery we're talking about. We're talking about chattel slavery. That is where one human owns another human against their will. They didn't agree to be owned by the other human. That's the slavery we're talking about.
Right.
And that's been around for millennia. Every culture has had slavery. The Greeks were slavers, so were the Romans. Even Christians had slavery. Paul talks about it in Philemon. We're going to come to that at the very end. So certainly slavery is nothing new. In Slav, the word slavery comes from Slav. The Slavs were the ones who were the slaves, the white slaves, and so the European slaves. And so this has been around for millennia. However, what's interesting is that Muslims have always taken one of three positions. They easily say, and if you put up on the slide, you'll see what I'm talking about here. Number one, that slavery is good as it is ordained by the Quran and thus Allah. That's one position some Muslims I come across today. Number two, slavery should not be practiced today as there is no genuine khilafat. Therefore, it should exist when there's a khilafat. That doesn't exist here in the West. And then the more popular position that's coming now all over the Western Muslim world is number three, that Islam came to abolish slavery.
Correct.
That this is one of the great things about Islam. There is no slave history. We don't have a slave history.
And that's how I grew up.
That's how you grew up. And you heard that,
Yes.
that Islam has never been part of the slave trade. This is a white problem. This is a Christian problem. This is a European problem. All the slavery was a Atlantic slavery. And so you're going to hear that over and over again. Now, there were two ways that slavery existed in Islam, according to what I'm hearing from many of the apologists. You became a slave either as a prisoner of war or you were born into slavery in Islam. All other forms, according to Islam, were abolished. And that the treatment of slaves was somewhat not benign. And if you look, I'll put up the slide. Here you can see Abu Dawud, who then talks about the treatment of slaves. And he says that there was only one camel. Even if that you have lost, he then began to beat him while the apostle of Allah was smiling. You can see that's the best you're going to get on how they treated slavery. But whenever I got into this discussion with Muslims, I always wanted to find out, well, let's go back to the Book of the Man. We always go back to the Book of the Man. We've said that everywhere to really define what Islam is. So to go to the man, you need to go to Muhammad's own example. And you need to ask what Muhammad did with slaves. And when you look at what Muhammad did with slaves, you need to go back to his sayings. Let's put it up on a slide on there. And you can see the question is this an abolitionist example of Muhammad? Sahih Bukhari, Volume 5, Book 57, number 99. Go ahead and read what it says.
Basically, it's Sahih Bukhari, like I said, Bilal, who is known to be, by the way, a slave at the time of Muhammad, Bilal said to Abu Bakr, if you have bought me for yourself, then keep me for yourself. But if you have bought me for Allah's sake, then leave me for Allah's sake.
And you hear Muslims repeat this all the time. See, Bilal, he was freed. So there was no problem with slavery. Even the Prophet freed all his slaves. Bilal is always the one they bring up. And they bring up this reference here. I find it fascinating they always bring up this reference here. So let's read another one. Now here's Sahih Bukhari, Volume 3, Book 47, number 565. Go ahead and read this.
It says, the freed slave of Ibn Abbas that Maymuna bint al-Harith told him that she manumitted...
Manumit means to release.
That's right. A slave girl without taking a permission of the Prophet. On the day when it was her turn to be with the Prophet, she said, do you know, O Allah's Apostle, that I have manumitted my slave girl? He said, have you really? She replied in the affirmative. He says, you would have gotten more reward if you had given her, meaning the slave girl, to one of your maternal uncles.
So here you start to see in the example of Muhammad that he actually he scolded her for manumitting a slave. That this is, no, you shouldn't be doing this. So now let's look at Sahih Muslim, book 15, number 4112.
Imran ibn Hussein reported that a person who had no other property emancipated 6 slaves of his at the time of his death. Allah's Messenger called for them and divided them into 3 sections, cast lots among them, and then basically set 2 free and kept 4 in slavery. And he, speaking of the Prophet, spoke severely of him.
So we're getting a completely different image of Muhammad. It did not look like he liked manumitting slaves. In fact, in this case, he kept 4 for himself. So the traditions seem to show a different picture of Muhammad. Let's try Sahih Bukhari, volume 3, book 41, number 598.
This time it's narrated Jabir, a man, manumitted a slave, and he had no other property than that, basically the slave. So the Prophet canceled the manumission and sold the slave for him. Nuaym ibn al-Naham bought the slave for him. So the Prophet was trying to solve his problem of finances.
You can see right there that does not look like he was an abolitionist, like Muslims like to claim all the time. Yeah. Muhammad is not an abolitionist, not from what the traditions are telling. Here is Sahih Bukhari, the most authoritative of the hadith compilations, volume 8, book 80, number 753.
And this is, of course, Anas ibn Malik was a big deal. The Prophet says, the freed slave belongs to the people who have freed him, or said something similar.
So here we now are looking, and I always want to do this. I always make sure I want to go back to the Prophet's example. And what we're noticing, this belief in the Muslim community that there's no problem with slavery certainly is not evidenced by what we see in Muhammad's own example. Now, before we end this section here and we go on to the next one, what I want to do is try to help Muslims understand why we're asking this question to begin with. This is a hugely important subject in places like America, in places like Jamaica, in places like Trinidad along the Caribbean, where there are huge populations of descendants of slaves. We therefore need to ask, is these descendants who did come from the west coast of Africa, is this uniquely a Christian problem, or is this also a Muslim problem? We're not even got into the slavery yet.
That's right.
We're just looking at the traditions. And I want to start by talking about the Prophet's example. Then I want to now move into the next segment, in which we'll do in the next episode. I want to look at coloration. Because to understand why the Prophet Muhammad, if he is a prophet, why he's saying this, or why there even is a problem with Islamic slavery, we need to go back and see where this all came from.
Absolutely. And also, Dr. J, I mean, it's very obvious that the Prophet was looking at them as a human property, not as human beings who are free, made in the image of God, and he should rejoice in the fact that if he's a mercy to mankind, this will be the ultimate act of mercy.
Okay.
But that's not the case. So
now, in the next segment, we are going to get a little more controversial, just to warn people, because now we're going to ask, are the slaves Arab slaves, or are the slaves always black slaves, and are there white slaves?
That's correct.
Is there a problem? Is there a situation of coloration here that has to do with how Islam defines slavery? We'll get into that in the next episode.
Thank you so much again, Dr. J. And hopefully, if you've been watching this, you will be willing at least to understand that we are sharing facts. We are not forming any opinions on our own. We're using the data that is available out there. Oftentimes, as you have seen so far, it's Islamic sources. If you're a Muslim watching this, please understand that it is not an attack on you as a Muslim, but we want to expose Islam and show you that what you are taught is one thing, what reality is totally different story. Hopefully, you will join us for part 2. Until we meet again, have a blessed day. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe so that you don't miss future videos. And please consider becoming a patron on patreon.com/Sierra International.